The 19th of November. The jungle clearing behind the American field. Hospitals still smelled of smoke and antiseptic when the captured Japanese female nurses were marched inside. Their uniforms were torn, their eyes hollow from fear and exhaustion, and every one of them expected humiliation, interrogation, or punishment. Nothing in their training had prepared them for what happened next. As the flap of the medical tent opened, the wounded lay everywhere: American soldiers, Filipino scouts, even to Japanese prisoners on stretchers. The nurses froze. They had spent months treating men under impossible conditions, improvising supplies, cutting bandages from their own clothes, boiling rainwater in rusted pots. But this rows of organized stations, trays of gleaming instruments, bottles of morphine and penicillin was another world. Then came the words that stunned them. A calm American doctor, sleeves rolled up and soaked in sweat, looked at the group and said in slow but clear English, "We need your help now." For a full second, they didn't move. The eldest nurse, Nakamura Keiko, believed she had misheard. Help from them. These were enemy doctors, enemy soldiers, enemy hands. Their officers had warned them many times. Americans were monsters who tortured captives, who mutilated the wounded, who treated Japanese women with cruelty. Yet here these same Americans were asking, not ordering, for assistance. Before the women could react, a stretcher was rushed in, carrying a young American private, bleeding heavily from a chest wound. The doctor barked instructions, but his eyes were gentle, almost pleading. "If we don't operate now, he'll die. Please scrub in." The nurses looked at each other, terrified. They were trained, yes, but to work under Japanese command, using Japanese procedures. Helping an American soldier felt like crossing an invisible line of loyalty and identity. But the human instinct to save a life rose above everything else. Slowly, hesitantly, Nurse Keiko stepped forward. Then another, then the rest. The American staff quickly guided them to the washing station. Warm water poured from metal taps, something none of the women had felt in months. As they scrubbed, an older American medic whispered, "Your nurses. We're doctors. War or not. We save who's in front of us." The simplicity of that statement shook them. In Japan, they had been told Americans lacked honor, lacked discipline, lacked compassion. But the scene before their eyes contradicted everything. Inside the main surgical tent, the operation began immediately. The American doctor, Captain Harris, directed movements with steady confidence. Queso, assisted by holding another nurse, prepared sutures, while a third monitored pulse and breathing. The harmony between the two sides' enemies hours ago felt surreal. No yelling, no threats, no cruelty, only urgency and cooperation. As the bullet was located, one nurse instinctively handed Harris the correct clamp before he even asked. He looked at her with genuine respect. "Good eye," he said softly. Her breath caught. No Japanese officer had ever praised her this way. She had been taught that women served only as silent shadows behind the war effort, replaceable, unnoticed. But here, in an American surgical tent, she was treated as an equal with real skill. The operation continued for nearly an hour. Sweat dripped into masks. Hands trembled from fatigue. The lanterns flickered as rain hammered the canvas roof. But when the final stitch was tied and the private's breathing steadied, something passed through the room that none of them could name. Not victory, not surrender. Something human, something shared. The nurses stepped back, staring at the soldier whose life they had just fought to save. Queso lowered her eyes, whispering a small prayer. Not for Japan. Not for the emperor, for the young man who had nearly died under her hands. As they removed their gloves, an American nurse approached with a smile. "You saved him," she said. "We couldn't have done it without you." The Japanese women stood speechless. Gratitude, another thing they never expected to receive from their captors. Through the open tent flap, they saw more wounded arriving. Some Japanese, some American. Pain did not choose sides, and in this tent, neither did mercy. For the first time since their capture, the nurses felt their fear loosen slightly. Not disappear, but loosen. Then, something even more shocking occurred. Captain Harris called them again. "We have another surgery. A Japanese officer. He's critical. Help us." The nurses' eyes widened. Americans helping a Japanese officer, treating a sworn enemy with the same urgency as their own. It shattered the last remaining fragments of propaganda lodged in their minds. They moved quickly, almost instinctively, to assist. They cleaned wounds, prepped instruments, controlled bleeding. Every action felt like stepping deeper into a reality they had never imagined it. Reality where saving a life mattered more than wearing a uniform. By the time the second operation ended, exhaustion weighed on all of them. But something new lived in their expressions. A quiet, stunned respect for the men and women around them. They had expected cruelty. Instead, they found professionalism. They expected hatred. Instead, they found trust. And when Captain Harris finally told them, "You did good work today," some of the nurses felt tears sting behind their eyes. They weren't just captives anymore. They were caregivers, again recognized, valued, needed, and nothing could have shocked them more. Dawn crept slowly over the battered island outpost, its light sliding across. Shredded palm trunks and broken medical crates scattered like bones across the ground. Inside, a half-collapsed wooden shack. 7 Japanese female nurses sat, huddled together, trying to stay calm as the muffled footsteps of American troops moved. Somewhere outside, their white uniforms had long since turned gray from ash, smoke, and dried blood. Their faces were pale from exhaustion and fear, and yet their eyes held a stubborn strength that refused to disappear. They had survived bombardment, starvation, retreat, and finally capture. But today, something unexpected was about to happen, something none of them could ever have imagined while serving under the Japanese Imperial Army. When the American doctors entered the small structure, the nurses braced for interrogation. Instead, one U.S. medic, tired man with a torn sleeve and a stethoscope still hanging around his neck, looked at them with an expression not of anger but desperation. "We have wounded outside, many," he said slowly, using simple English and gestures so they could understand. "We need help. Surgery, now." The nurses stared at him in total shock. Help them. Assist the enemy. Be allowed to work, instead of being locked away, questioned, or worse. For several moments, no one moved. The shack felt frozen in time. Then, the oldest nurse, realized something. The Americans didn't have enough medical staff. The battlefield had overwhelmed them, and the nurses, despite being prisoners, were still trained professionals, sworn to preserve life. She whispered to the others. They exchanged tense looks, but slowly, one by one, they nodded. Aiko stepped forward. "We help," she said quietly. The American doctor exhaled with visible relief and immediately signaled them to follow. Outside, the scene was chaos. Wounded American soldiers on stretchers, moaning in pain, makeshift tents made from tarps, medical supplies scattered across tables, the air thick with the smell of blood and antiseptic. Even several injured Japanese soldiers captured earlier were lying nearby, proving that the U.S. medics were treating anyone they could save. The Japanese nurses felt another wave of shock. They had been taught Americans were inhuman monsters, but here they were, treating enemy and ally side by side. The moment they entered the surgery tent, there was no time for conflict or politics, only action. A young U.S. surgeon handed Aiko a pair of gloves. "Prep him," he ordered, pointing to a soldier with a shrapnel wound in his abdomen. Without hesitation, Aiko slipped instantly into professional mode. Her hands moved with precision. Her voice steadied. Years of training took control. Meanwhile, the other nurses were assigned around the tent, managing blood transfusions, sterilizing instruments, wiping sweat off surgeons' brows, bandaging wounds. The Americans watched in surprise. These nurses worked faster than some of the U.S. medics. Their technique was sharp, focused, disciplined. Within minutes, the entire medical tent was functioning twice as efficiently as before. At one point, a U.S. surgeon muttered, "Damn, they're incredible." But the nurses were fighting their own internal war. Every time they touched an American uniform, their minds flashed with fear. Every time they heard a soldier groan in pain, they felt a strange mix of duty and confusion. They had saved Japanese soldiers countless times, but this was different. Their hearts were caught between loyalty and humanity. Hours passed. Wounds were stitched. Limbs were stabilized. Lives were saved, American and Japanese alike. During a brief pause, one American medic handed a canteen to a young nurse named Hannah. She hesitated before accepting it. The medic smiled gently, saying, "You're doing good work, thank you." Hannah's eyes widened. She had not expected kindness from the enemy, no less. A part of her chest felt warm for the first time in weeks. Later, an injured Japanese soldier locked eyes with the nurses as he was treated by us medics. He seemed confused, even hurt, seeing his countrywomen assisting the enemy. But then he noticed something else. The Americans were treating him too, not torturing him, saving him. His expression softened. Near sunset, the surgeries were finally slowing down. The American doctor, who first approached them, walked over to Aiko and bowed his head slightly. "You saved many lives today," he said. Aiko, stunned, returned the bower gesture she never imagined making to an American. In that moment, years of propaganda, fear, and hatred cracked just a little. Not broken, but cracked enough for understanding to shine through. Then came the part the nurses feared most. What now? Would they be locked up again, interrogated? Instead, the doctor pointed to an empty tent. "You stay there tonight. Safeguards outside, so you don't get bothered. Not prisoners, just guests." The word hit them like an earthquake. Guests. Inside that tent, as they sat together replaying the day, they realized something shocking. The Americans didn't see them as enemies. They saw them as nurses, as humans. And perhaps, for the first time, the nurses began to see the Americans the same way. Aiko whispered, "War makes us enemies, but saving lives makes us the same." Outside, the sky turned red with the colors of dusk. The battlefield was quiet. The island was still broken, its trees shattered, its buildings burned, its soil soaked with blood from two nations. But inside that medical tent, for a few fragile hours, something rare had happened. Enemy hands had worked together. Lives had been saved across battle lines. And 7 Japanese nurses who woke up expecting fear, instead discovered humanity in the most unexpected place. That night, they slept not as captives, but as healers who had helped change the fate of dozens of wounded men from both sides. And in the middle of the chaos of World War II, that was a miracle all its own.